Why would a quiet, shaky old man at a shooting range bring a Navy SEAL recruit to tears just by rolling up his sleeve? It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where sunlight feels thick and time stretches like old leather. The shooting range wasn't crowded, just the regulars. Dust clung to every surface, the distant echo of shots blending with the occasional buzz of conversation. The air smelled like gunpowder, oil, and something older, like stories people stopped telling a long time ago. He sat there at lane 7 like he always did, wrapped in a flannel jacket too warm for the weather, cap pulled low, hands trembling, slightly as he loaded his pistol. Nobody paid much attention to him anymore. Most thought he was just some old man clinging to old habits, grumbling at targets, mumbling to himself. No one cared to ask his name. They called him Old Tom, though no one knew if that was even accurate. Then the recruit walked in. He was tall, clean-cut, eyes scanning every inch of the room with that sharp, instinctive calculation. People said he was preparing for Bud S. Had already passed the first phase. His name was Mason, young, full of certainty, muscle, and mission. He wasn't arrogant, but he moved like someone who didn't know what fear was yet. The kind of guy who saw life in straight lines. Go, complete, win. The old man looked up once, briefly, then returned to his gun. Mason took the lane next to him, adjusted his stance, and began firing. Tight groups, controlled breath, efficiency, in motion. After a while, he noticed the old man's hands trembling between each shot, but not his aim. That was solid, unshakable. His bullets tore through the paper like they knew exactly where to land. Curious, Mason leaned over between reloads. "You've got a good hand for someone your age." The old man didn't look at him. "I had enough practice," he muttered, almost like he was talking to the gun. "You ex-military?" No answer. Mason tried again. "I'm enlisting for SEALs. Phase 1's done." The old man's hand paused for a moment. Just a beat. Then he resumed loading, slow and rhythmic. "You ever see combat?" Mason pushed, not out of disrespect, just the naive eagerness of youth reaching out toward legacy. A long silence. Then, in a voice so low it almost disappeared between shots, the old man said, "Don't talk about war like it's a trophy." Mason blinked. "I didn't mean it that way, sir." "No, kid," the old man said, his voice soft but flinty. "You didn't. But you will. That should have ended it. But it didn't." Between each volley, Mason stole glances. He started noticing the way the old man breathed, not from his chest, but deeper, from somewhere further inside, like every breath had weight, like he'd carried people with it before. Then it happened. The old man went to retrieve his jacket. From the chair behind him, the sleeve of his flannel rolled up just a little too far. Mason's eyes caught a glimpse of something on his forearm, a faded tattoo, half shield, half wings, with a trident slicing through a skull. The ink was aged, but unmistakable. Mason froze. It wasn't just any SEAL insignia. It was old, from the early days. The kind you read about in history books. The kind that belonged to men who were dropped behind lines without radios, who swam miles in darkness, who came back hollow and silent. He stepped forward. "Sir, that tattoo, are you?" The old man turned, eyes locking onto Mason's for the first time, clear, piercing, haunted. "I was haunted. He said simply. And that was when everything changed. Mason sat down on the bench beside him as if instinctively drawn toward something heavier than duty, something sacred. There was a respect in his posture now, but also caution. The kind you reserve for men who've seen ghosts. "I've read about your unit," Mason said, voice low. "Operation Iron Veil, the ones who never spoke." The old man's jaw twitched. "They speak, just not in words." He didn't offer more. He didn't need to, but Mason couldn't stop. "Why did you never tell anyone you're a legend?" The old man chuckled, bitter and hollow. "Legends are stories. We were just kids with knives dropped into places God forgot." The quiet between them deepened. The sound of distant gunfire faded. For a moment, the range wasn't a room anymore. was a memory, a corridor back to somewhere cold, wet, and soaked in adrenaline. You ever kill someone you didn't want to? The old man asked suddenly. Mason looked away. No, sir. You will, he said, if you last long enough. Mason didn't speak. He didn't need to. The old man picked up his pistol again, aiming downrange. He fired 3 times. Each shot tore through the bullseye like it had no right to miss. I stopped shooting for medals a long time ago, he said. Now I shoot to forget. Then he stood up, slipping his jacket back on, hiding the tattoo as if it was a sin instead of a badge. As he walked away, Mason stood and saluted without thinking. Not for the man's rank or his record, but for the weight he carried and the silence that followed him. The old man didn't salute back. He simply paused by the exit, looked over his shoulder and said, "Don't chase glory, kid. Chase peace. You'll never catch it, but it's the only thing worth running after." And with that, he was gone. But Mason never forgot that day, because that wasn't just some quiet old man at a shooting range. That was a war no one talks about, and the man who never left it behind. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. The old man's words echoed through the empty spaces of his apartment like ghost rounds fired in the dark. Don't talk about war like it's a trophy. You will. Now I shoot to forget. He lay flat on his bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above him, thinking about what he'd seen. Not just the tattoo, but the weight behind it. Mason had trained hard. He knew the drills, the techniques, the objectives. But nothing in the manual prepared him for the look in that man's eyes, the look of someone who had survived not just enemies, but himself. The next morning, Mason returned to the shooting range. Earlier than usual. He didn't expect to see the old man again. But something pulled him back like a tether wrapped around his gut. That kind of presence doesn't just vanish. Lane 7 was empty. He practiced anyway. But every shot felt off. Too clean. Too controlled. Like he was rehearsing for a movie instead of war. 3 days passed. Then on Friday afternoon, Mason saw him again. Same cap, same flannel jacket, same lane. But this time, something was different. The old man seemed slower, not physically, spiritually. His hands weren't just trembling now. They looked tired of holding the same weight for decades. Mason didn't approach him right away. He took lane 6 again, waiting, watching. When the old man finally paused to reload, Mason turned. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. The old man didn't look up. For what? For treating you like a story instead of a man. That made him stop. He slowly raised his eyes. They were not angry, just worn out, like a book that's been read too many times. "Most people treat me like dust on a shelf," the old man said. "You at least saw the book." Mason nodded. "I've been thinking about what you said, about chasing peace." "Don't." The old man inserted the last round into the magazine and snapped it in. "It'll ruin your aim." "But isn't that the point?" Mason asked. "To come home with some part of your soul still intact?" The old man laughed, short and dry. "Kid, if you're lucky, you come home. What comes with you? That's a different matter." They stood in silence for a moment. The only sound was the steady bang, bang, bang from a far-off lane. Then Mason asked something he hadn't dared ask before. "What happened to your team?" The air shifted. The old man's hand froze mid-motion. He didn't look at Mason, just set the gun down and sat heavily on the bench behind him. "We were ghosts before we died," he said finally. "Dropped into a valley in the Hindu Kush, snow up to our thighs, night falling, radio dead. It was supposed to be recon." He looked straight ahead, not at Mason, not at anything, just memory. "We found more than recon. Hostages, kids, civilians. Whole village wired like a trap. Command said wait, but we couldn't, not with the things we saw." Mason swallowed hard. "What did you do?" The old man turned his head very slowly. "We disobeyed." His voice was flat, not proud, not ashamed. Just true. We got 30 people out that night, but only 2 of us made it back. Silence. Mason sat beside him, breath caught somewhere between his ribs. "Why didn't you ever speak about it?" he whispered. "Because the medals they gave us didn't match the coffins." That line hit like a bullet to the chest. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was a photo. Old, grainy, black and white. 7 men. Faces blurred from time and sun. Young. Alive. Standing on a ridge, with snow behind them and blood beneath. "That's them," he said softly. "The real heroes. I just came home." Mason stared at the photo. "They didn't teach us this part," he said. The old man smiled faintly. "They can't. You have to live it." He tucked the photo away and picked up his gun again. "I came here for years," he said, "thinking I could erase the sounds. But you never really silence them, you just fire louder shots to drown them out." Mason looked at him. "Then why do you keep coming?" The old man didn't answer right away. He adjusted his stance, aimed, downrange, and fired once. The shot echoed. Then he turned to Mason and said, "Because I still don't trust the silence." And Mason understood. This wasn't just a place to practice, it was a place to survive. A battlefield without a war where broken soldiers came to remind themselves they were still breathing. That day, they didn't shoot much. They just sat. 2 generations. 2 lives. 1 truth. And when Mason finally stood to leave, he looked at the old man and said, "You may not salute anymore, but I do." The old man smiled, not with pride, not with pain, just peace. And Mason knew then, this man wasn't his past. He was his warning, his mirror, and maybe, if Mason was careful enough, his future not yet written. Rain came hard that Sunday. The shooting range sat in eerie silence, metal roofs echoing the rhythm of water like distant chopper blades. The sky hung low, gray, and heavy, pressing down on everything, as if the clouds themselves carried memory. Mason showed up anyway. He didn't know why, habit maybe, or something deeper, that invisible thread pulling him toward something unresolved, toward someone. The old man was already there, seated at lane 7 again, his cap dripping, jacket darker from the downpour. He sat still, back, straight, hands resting on his thighs, staring at the far wall like it held something only he could see. This time, Mason didn't walk to his own lane. He just sat down beside him. No words exchanged. The silence was comfortable now. A quiet, not of absence, but of understanding. After a while, the old man spoke. "You came back. So did you." "That's the problem," the old man murmured. A long pause. Mason shifted slightly, his voice low. "Do you have family?" The old man didn't answer right away. His jaw clenched, and he looked out at the rain beyond the open range windows. "Had a son. Named him Joseph. Smart kid, kind, used to build little wooden ships from scratch." "What happened?" "He joined the Marines. Said he wanted to be like his old man." A ghost of a smile passed his lips, one that didn't reach his eyes. Didn't know what that really meant. Mason waited, letting him take his time. He went to Fallujah in '06, first deployment. First week, vehicle got hit. The old man's voice cracked like thin ice. They never found all of him. Mason looked down, throat tight. "I never wanted him to go," the old man continued. "Told him war wasn't like the stories. He said, 'That's why I need to write my own.'" Silence fell again. "But he didn't write a story," the old man said, voice hoarse. "He became a footnote." That line struck Mason harder than any sniper round ever could. He thought of all the names etched on memorials, of flags folded into triangles, of mothers who answered doors to uniformed strangers. "Is that why you come here?" Mason asked. "To remember him?" "No," the old man whispered. "I come here to forgive myself." Mason was quiet for a long time, then finally asked, "Did you ever?" The old man looked at him, truly looked at him, with eyes aged beyond their years, hollow but not empty. No, there was no anger in the answer, just truth. I trained him, showed him how to shoot, how to survive, how to disappear if needed. Thought I was teaching him to be strong, the old man said. Turns out I just handed him a loaded legacy. Mason felt a chill crawl up his spine. He understood, maybe for the first time, what legacy really meant. Not medals or recognition, but scars passed down like heirlooms. Wounds you didn't just carry, but bled onto the people you loved. What would you have done differently, he asked. The old man stared into the rain, his voice barely a whisper. I would have told him that being a soldier is easy. Being a man afterward, that's the real fight. Mason nodded slowly. Something shifted inside him. He realized the weight he was preparing to carry wasn't just his own. He stood up and walked to his lane, but didn't pick up his weapon. Instead, he just stared at the target, paper waving slightly from the draft. You know, Mason said without turning, I used to think shooting made me feel strong. That tight grouping meant I was ready. The old man didn't reply. Mason looked over his shoulder. But it's not the aim, is it? He said. It's the reason. The old man's lips curved into a soft, sad smile. Now you're starting to get it. That night, Mason skipped his training drills. Instead, he wrote a letter, to no one, to everyone, to his future self. He wrote about the old man, about Joseph, about what it meant to chase something without knowing the cost. And for the first time, he questioned not his mission, but his meaning. The rain outside never let up. But inside, something began to clear. Maybe you couldn't change the past. Maybe peace was never something you found. But maybe, just maybe, it was something you chose, one breath at a time. The week passed slower than usual. Mason had returned to base training. Physical drills, mental tests, tactical exercises. The instructors yelled, the routines intensified, and the days bled into each other like camo in a sandstorm. But none of it shook him, like the silence of that old man at Lane 7. It was haunting, him now, not like a ghost but like a shadow. A presence that lingered behind every lesson, every order barked, every round fired. His teammates noticed. You good, Mason? They asked more than once. He always nodded. But inside something had shifted. Before his motivation had been clear. Prove himself. Be the best. Make it into SEAL Team 1. Earn the trident. Wear the flag. Become the man others feared in the field. But now there was a wrinkle in his vision. A wrinkle shaped like an old man who fired rounds into empty targets, trying to erase memories carved into bone. That Friday, Mason returned to the range. Late, alone. The wind was cold, sky flat. Lane 7, empty. But a folded note lay on the SO bench. His name was written on it, shaky and deliberate. He opened it. If you're reading this, then you've come back, which means there's still hope. I can't keep coming here. Not because I don't want to, but because I've said what needed saying. You asked me if I ever forgave myself. I said no, but that doesn't mean you can't. You still have time. Find your reason before someone else writes it for you. G. Mason. Read it 3 times before folding it back into his jacket. He didn't fire a single shot that evening. Instead, he sat on the bench, looking out at the target sheets flapping gently in the wind. And he thought about how many lives never made it to the bench. How many never got the chance to question why they aimed, only what they hit. He thought about Joseph, about G, and then about himself. That night, back in his barracks, he pulled out a journal, something he hadn't touched in months. He wasn't a writer. Words never flowed easily, but somehow tonight they did. He wrote about grief, not the loud kind, but the kind that seeps in quietly, the kind that lingers in the weight of a rifle, in the silence after a shot, in the way old men stare through people like they're not quite here. He wrote about the idea of heroism, how they all chased it like it was a crown, not knowing it was often a chain, He wrote about guilt, the kind you inherit without realizing. And by the time he stopped writing, the page was soaked near the edges, not with tears, but with something that felt like release. The next day, Mason requested a pass. His instructor raised a brow. "Anything I should know?" "Personal visit, sir," Mason replied. It took 3 buses and a borrowed map. He found G's house tucked between 2 barren lots on the edge of town. A simple 1-story cabin, mailbox rusted, wind chimes tinkling. The porch looked tired, like it had seen too many winters. He knocked. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Then the neighbor peeked over the fence. "Looking for Gordon?" Mason nodded. "Hospital," the woman said gently. "VA clinic. Breathing problems. Happens sometimes when he forgets his meds." Mason thanked her and turned. The hospital was another hour away. But Mason didn't hesitate. By the time he arrived, it was nearly evening. He found G in a small room near the end of the hallway. No machines, just a steady oxygen line and an old baseball game playing faintly on a wall-mounted TV. G opened his eyes when Mason entered. Surprised, but not shocked. "I didn't expect you," he said, voice raspy. "You left me a note," Mason replied, pulling up a chair. G smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd care." "I did," Mason said quietly. "More than I wanted to." They sat in silence for a while. Then Mason reached into his jacket and pulled out the journal. "I've been writing," he said. "Not much, just trying to understand." G tilted his head. "And? I think I want to be more than just a name on a list, or a shadow in someone else's story. I want to come home different." G's eyes softened. "That's the hardest mission you'll ever take, son." "I know," Mason said. "But I'd rather fight for that than just be good at pulling a trigger." The old man coughed, then chuckled. "You're further ahead than I ever was." Mason looked at him. "You never told me what the tattoo meant." G smiled. "It wasn't for glory. It was for memory," he said. "Every man I lost, their initials are hidden in the ink. That way I carry them. Not medals, not scars. Them." Mason leaned back quiet. "I don't think I'll ever get a tattoo," he said finally. G nodded. "That's okay, as long as you don't forget who you're fighting for, and what you're fighting to protect inside yourself." Mason sat with him until the nurses asked him to leave. On the way out, G's voice called after him. "Mason." He turned. "When you deploy," the old man said, "write down your reason. Keep it in your helmet. Don't let the bullets define you. Let the why be stronger than the war." Mason nodded once. He didn't salute. He didn't need to, because in that moment, he wasn't saying goodbye to an old man. He was carrying forward a legacy, one that would never be written on medals, but in the choices he'd make when no one was watching. 3 months later, the desert sun rose over a landscape that looked more like the moon than Earth. Mason adjusted his gear, sand crunching under his boots. His unit was in their final phase of training before deployment, live drills, real ammo, real stress, and no room for mistakes. His rifle was tight against his chest, helmet strap firm, and his breath steady. But inside him, something had changed. He wasn't just a weapon anymore. He was a man learning to master one. That folded piece of paper was still with him. Gordon's final words, along with his own short note he'd written underneath. "I'm not here to survive. I'm here to return with purpose." Most of the unit thought he was just the quiet one. Focused, disciplined, good under pressure. But no one knew that the same calmness they respected came from an old man in Lane 7, who once stared through pain with the kind of stillness only loss could teach. During a night op simulation, their team ran point through a mock urban village. Flashes of light, loud pops, and dust dancing with every breath. Mason covered a breach, his partner entered, cleared left, Mason swept right. Then silence. A figure in the corner. No weapon. Just a civilian dummy. He didn't shoot. 2 years ago, he might have pulled the trigger by instinct. Now, he moved past. That hesitation, born from purpose, earned him praise later. Good trigger discipline, his commander noted. You knew it. Wasn't a threat. But Mason wasn't proud of the decision because it was tactically correct. He was proud because it was his choice. Training ended soon after. His team prepped for real-world deployment. It was happening. On his final night stateside, Mason visited the range again, not to shoot, to sit. Lane 7 was empty, as always now, but he sat there quietly and imagined the old man beside him. He closed his eyes and whispered, I'm going, but I'll come back. And then with a pencil from his pack he carved 3 letters under the bench, J.G. Joseph Gordon. Not a statue, not a headline, just memory, etched into a place that mattered. A few days later, they were airborne. The mission was small-scale, recon-heavy, low-engagement risk. But Mason knew, even low risk could turn high in seconds. Their unit landed under moonlight in a rocky outskirt of a hostile border. Locals were tense, the terrain was unfamiliar, and communication sketchy. It was real now. During a patrol, they encountered a broken-down truck on the edge of a mountain pass. A boy, barely a teenager, stood beside it, waving his arms. The old Mason might have doubted, maybe ignored. But the new Mason remembered G's words. Let the why be stronger than the war. He signaled the team to halt, approached slowly, calmly, no raised weapon. The boy had no weapon either, just panic. In broken English, he explained, Father, inside, hurt. Inside, an older man was clutching his side, bleeding from an old wound. A rusty pipe had sliced him while they tried fixing the axle. Mason didn't hesitate. He dropped his rifle, pulled out gauze, and wrapped the man's side. Later that evening, the team captain asked why he risked stepping in so early. Mason just said, because sometimes we fix what's broken, not just shoot what moves. Back at camp that night, under the desert sky, Mason pulled out his journal and wrote, I saw Joseph today, in that boy's eyes, in his fear, and in the way I didn't want him to be afraid of me. Weeks passed. The mission wrapped. No casualties. No shots fired, but something powerful was left behind. Before flying out, the same boy and his father returned to camp. This time with a gift, a small wooden carving of an eagle. The boy pressed it into Mason's hands. Safe now, you good man. And something in Mason cracked open. He thought of G. Thought of that cabin porch, of chipping paint and slow chimes. Thought of the son who didn't come back, and the father who couldn't forgive himself. The next time he stood on American soil, Mason went straight from base to the VA hospital. G's room was empty. He feared the worst. But the nurse at the front desk smiled when he asked, He's home now, stronger, still stubborn. Mason drove 3 hours to that quiet house between empty lots. The mailbox was repainted, wind chimes still there. This time when he knocked, the door opened before the second tap. G stood there, thinner, older, but eyes just as sharp. Well, I'll be damned, the old man said. Mason handed him the eagle carving. From someone you saved, he said. G looked at it for a long moment. Didn't know I was still in that business? You are, Mason said. More than you know. They sat on the porch that night, neither saying much. The breeze rolled in gentle, the sky streaked orange. Finally, Mason asked, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Joseph had come back? G's eyes twitched, but not with pain. Just the echo of a memory. I think about it every day. Not with regret anymore. Just wonder. You think he'd be proud of you? G looked at Mason, really looked. He'd be proud of you. And for the first time, Mason felt something unspoken pass between them. Not as soldier to soldier, not as young to old, but as two men trying to heal in the only way they knew how. Before Mason left that evening, G pressed something into his hand, the original folded note. Now weathered, stained and worn at the edges. Keep it, G said. When you forget who you are, read it again. Mason nodded, eyes heavy. I won't forget. As he walked away, Mason knew this wasn't just the end of a visit. It was the beginning of something new. Not a mission, not a war, but a life with meaning. One built not from battles won, but from moments chosen, from people helped, from reasons remembered. And every time he opened his journal now, the words came easier. Not because he had the answers, but because he finally knew what questions to ask. The kind of questions that echo long after the gunfire fades. The kind of questions that quiet old men at shooting ranges carry in their bones. And the kind of questions that once heard, you never forget again. Moral message: true strength isn't in how well you shoot. It's in how deeply you understand why you're holding the gun in the first place. And peace isn't something we find in silence, but in the choices we make after the noise fades.